Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 71 of Get Out of Rap, the podcast all about contact center chat and everything around that. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by Jimmy Hosang, the CEO of the Modular analytics company. And just before I hit record, we were talking about how you get drawn to people from how they kind of portray themselves through the medium more often than not of LinkedIn. And I just like how you bring, Jimmy always brings personality. The Modular analytics company kind of follow that, I think, or I don't know, we'll get into that, but just a fresh, new, relatable kind of approach. So I'm really pleased to welcome you, Jimmy. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We were comparing t-shirts as well, so let's get your t-shirt in as well. This is
full shot like this.
Love it.
There you go. So yeah, so these are the top hip hop albums from 1996. But it's always a good talking point as I go through the hipster side of Manchester. A few people who stuff like that. What about yours?
This is from a Willing to Fail. It's a t-shirt brand set up by ex-special forces who are now into mixed martial arts. So but their message is all, it's about mentality. That's what I love about mixed martial arts. It's if you compare yourself, even though you're up against other people, if you compare yourself to others, you'll become bitter. But if you compete with yourself, you'll become better. And it's that kind of mentality displayed in t-shirts. So Willing to Fail is another one. Someone I saw the other day who knows I'm a Tottenham fan said that's very apt.
Yeah, just like years of pain and stuff.
Yeah, very willing.
I think some of that is a little bit of backward reasoning. Like a positive out of a negative.
So you would not be, I guess, what most people would in their mind's eye think about a CEO. Is it important for you to kind of just be yourself? And would you wear this pre-lockdown? Is there anything that you've done differently?
It's funny, actually. Yeah, it is interesting. I've been on a little bit of a strange journey with it, just as well, like a strange journey with the role, a strange journey like grappling with what a CEO should be and shouldn't be, and things like that. The clamor and then kind of the balance between like being authentic and being a representation of who I am, who like my company and all of the people around me. And it is always like a little bit of a challenge with that. Like for me personally, like I got brought up through like management with a lot of people who were kind of showed me some of the standards that you had to do. And I always remember, I've been very fortunate. I've been afforded like some great opportunities with people, but I think at the beginning of your career, it's about portraying a role and like being that role. So I always remember working for Vodafone in a shop and being like a really, really good salesperson and like doing really well, but I'd come in on a Saturday stinking of alcohol. And even though I'd smashed my sales target, my boss was like, that's not good enough. Like you need to be better than that. It's okay. Like, it's okay that you hit your sales target, but you need to be better. And I sort of took that away. And then but then at the flip side of that, I always remember working in bars and restaurants and dancing on a table while I was working and serving drinks while I was dancing on the table, and seeing like everybody like in a packed pub when there was a band playing like react to that, and seeing how you can kind of lift people as well, being like just kind of being yourself. And I think you're always maintaining that balance between like being a representative of your best self, but then also being authentic. And so I think the t-shirt thing is funny because I think I've started to now one reads the other. Once you start to see like a certain amount of success, and I'm by no means successful, like people kind of let you off for all of your bad traits, like being a bit like having a bit of a rubbish beard, like the almost backward engineer and go, oh yeah, well he's the CEO so he can do that kind of thing. Whereas I still think there's certain amounts of standards that you have to set.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because it's the kind of For me, it's that you're right. The more you progress, the more freedom you have, and the more it's kind of maybe badged as that's who he is, and that is his. If he's eccentric or whatever. Whereas earlier on, it's more about conformity. And but I wonder if this pandemic has made us blur the lines between home and work. I hope so, because it's not like you're like a Mr. Ben that leaves as an astronaut, goes to work, and you're a cowboy. You know, it's that kind of
especially not a cowboy.
yeah.
Say that's quite apt. No, I do think you're right. I think, look, but my hobby is my work as well.
Nice, yeah.
So like, I love it. Like, I talk about my work all the time. I talk about analytics and programming and AI and contact centers and things like that. And so the blurring between home life and work life for me happened like years and years and years ago. And I felt as though like mentally, like that's what I had to get myself into regardless. So the last kind of 15 months has been quite natural for me. I don't think it's changed so much. I think the hardest part is not seeing people in the flesh. And like when you're a people person, you kind of feed off energy. And if you're in a room and you're doing presenting or pitching and stuff, you can see people and you can see when they're like falling asleep or when they're nodding off or when they're energized, and you can kind of react to that. It's kind of, there's a dynamic between the presenter and the audience that you don't really get in this type of, you know, in terms of like the Zoom calls and the Teams calls and stuff like that. But I always kind of merge them together. I do think it's kind of interesting though, like, you know, some people do need the separation. And some people, I think you've got to be mindful that not everybody like wants to work. Like,
yeah.
Not everybody like loves it maybe as much as like I do or you do or some other people do. And some people want the separation between church and state, so to speak. And so yeah, I think finding that balance between like the office working and the people who are always on versus the people that are there to do a job, I think is important.
This kind of passion that you have and work being your hobby, is that always been there in your career? Where did this all start for you? Maybe just take us through this. How have you got to where you are now?
So I am an incredibly lazy person. super lazy. So I think growing up, going through school, I think I had like, I've got some natural talents, and I think I don't think this is necessarily the case anymore, but I had like a relatively good memory. And so what that's good for when you're at school is like remembering like how to calculate stuff, and or remembering like bits of prose when it comes to, you know, your drama class or English and stuff. And so I think that got me so far. But then when I got into my GCSEs and my A levels, the result of that was actually I wasn't really learning anything. Like, and I started to fall back because I am like, naturally, I am a lazy person. I then went to university and I learned how to do a lot. So I learned how to go out like 7 nights on the spin, drinking. I learned how to manage my hangover better.
Yeah, this sounds like my experience.
Yeah. I learned how to lie to my landlord that the money was going to be paid the next month because I spent it on Lucky Bank. So yeah, it was a lot of learning, a steep learning curve. But yeah, I really wasted 3 years at university just going out and enjoying myself. And I think my mother and my nan and some of my family were like, "What is he doing? Like, what's he doing with his life?" So I think I'm an inherently lazy person, and so what really happened for me is I did media and performing arts at uni, didn't get my degree. I think I thought I had some talent for it, and I started to do some acting and do some stage work, and I've done a little bit of TV, and then realized how absolutely rubbish I was, like compared to everybody else, like really, really bad. Like my ability to do like an accent is like zero, and like and all of the kebabs and started to put like a little bit of padding on my midriff. And so yeah, so even as in my early 20s, like I was starting to look a little bit out of shape, and I couldn't do anything. What I was really good at was a stage fall. So if I had to do some slapstick or something like that, I was
and that's uni. Come on, that's got to be hedge diving and stuff like that. Just
exactly
makes you bulletproof, doesn't it?
in the mosh pit. Yeah. So so there was a lot of that, and honestly, I think what happened was I had kind of a crisis in my mid-20s when I actually went, can I swear?
Yeah.
I went, holy shit, like I'm 26 years old and like I don't have a degree. I don't really have the GCSEs that I really wanted. I've got my daughter was on the way, and I was like, what am I actually going to do with my life? I was working in bars and restaurants like 60, 70 hours a week. I was playing poker online, which I was relatively okay at, but made a few £100 here or there. But I was like, I need to do something. And so I just had this moment and I was like, right, I'm going to teach myself how to code. Within the first week, I knew that it would take me years and years and years to be any good at it. So I just set myself up with a goal that I wasn't going to think about time. I was just going to break everything down, and just every single day I would code, and every single day I would apply for jobs as an analyst just to get myself through it. And I think what that's taught me now is now we've got to, 12, 13 years worth of doing analytics roles. What it's taught me is that I think it is all about incrementalism and like mindset and breaking everything down and just being super, super disciplined with yourself every single day. Because now I look back now and like people invite me onto podcasts to talk about contact centers and analytics, and I just look back and just like, I know the thick end of F all about all this stuff. All I did was like, I got my head down, didn't think too far ahead, and just incrementally like ground away. And a lot of people want things immediately now. They want things like straight away. And I'm also like, I'm an impulsive person who wants things right away, most things as well. But what I was able to do with a very, very narrow part of my life was to just get my head down and just like chip away at it. And that's kind of how I am where I am.
How did you go from, what was you went from a performing sort of being out there to code. What was it about code that made, or can you talk through that? What was were you always interested, or?
So it's quite a complex kind of decision-making process, but it comes down to this: money. So, I thought to myself, how can I make more money? At that time in my life, like that was what was really important. Like I said, so I was probably on. I wasn't anywhere near like even. I don't even think the minimum wage when you take into account all the hours that I was working, I needed to support my family. So I genuinely I looked at what was the programming language that generated the most amount of income, and that was SQL at the time, and SAS, which is statistical programming software. And I gave myself the task of learning SQL, which was kind of open and there was lots of resources, and then finding a job that would teach me SAS. So that's kind of the fundamentals, and that was the motivation. I think, like, if I'm being straight, I was always relatively good at like maths and things like that when I was at school. I'll tell a story that like my maths tutor didn't. My maths teacher, for my class, was at the top group for maths. Didn't show up to classes because he had a bit of a meltdown, and we were a terrible group of people at like a kind of a middling school at the time, but we were a rowdy bunch, and I think he just couldn't be bothered with us. So we missed like weeks and weeks and weeks of lessons, and so we couldn't ever do I couldn't do the top paper for maths. So I ended up getting a B in my GCSEs, but I was lazy. So I was like, I'll just do stuff that was easy for me. So, and you make these really, really important decisions, and you're like, when you're like 14 years old. So at 14, like
Yeah.
you choose your GCSEs.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy, mate. Like,
It is insane.
how, like no 14-year-old should be allowed to decide
No,
anything about their life. Yeah.
I'm not being funny. At uni, when I first went there, they did this thing where you went to do the degree that you'd chosen. So for me, it was psychology, but then you did two other subjects. I did sociology and politics. And at the end of the first 2 terms, I think it was, you took a small exam in the other two subjects that you hadn't ever done before. And if you were okay, you could switch. You could just completely switch. And I switched because politics gave me 2 weeks extra holiday and it had less lectures. Right? And that was what I was 18. So you're right. It's like one of my daughters has just chosen her options. And when she's saying, what should I do? It's so difficult because you're like, I don't know. What do you like doing? But that's going to change. You're only 14. So if I didn't know at 18, even when I left uni, I didn't know what I was going to do. And like you, had children young, and that kind of galvanized me to go, yeah, it's not just about me anymore. I can't just bumble along, because I was quite happy to bumble.
Yeah.
As well. But you've got this dichotomy that you say you're lazy, but then you put in the work to code. You put in the work to teach yourself through that, even that incrementalism, right? Which is you just show up, show up and keep practicing and keep getting better.
It's that. So it's like, I remember there's probably some things like, if I was forced to look back and analyze like myself a little bit, because I am like more interested in psychology and human behavior and the science behind it and philosophy and stuff now, because I think what I learned about data analytics, data science, is people who just focus solely on that get it wrong because they misunderstand the human condition. And I'm more interested in how you know, the psychology and how you nudge people to do certain things, and then reflecting and looking at my journey and just showing up. That's an interesting just idea, like the concept of just showing up. And I remember I used to play cricket and football, and for football, I used to love playing. All my friends played, but I never made the first 11 ever. And a lot of the time, I was like an unused sub. My mum used to go absolutely nuts about it, but I just used to show up.
Yeah,
I love doing it.
Yeah.
And I think for programming and data science, it was just that mentality that I wanted to enjoy it. I wanted, even though it was really difficult and complicated, I wasn't going to let that get me down. I was going to like enjoy the grind and enjoy getting into it and just show up every day, like just be present. And if you do that over time, you all of a sudden you build up skills and just be disciplined enough to just to show up. And it's an interesting concept.
I love it. So if you got to take you back then, so did you get your first analytics role, and then did you, even when you had that, did you carry on teaching yourself outside of work as well?
Yeah, and I had to. So my kind of first semi-analytical role was for Vodafone. So I got transferred to an on-site position working for a corporate client, and I started looking at like corporate spend and how much they were spending on Blackberries and the mobile phone bills and things like that, and the 3G cards that used to get. Yeah. And then at that point, I was like, oh, SaaS programmers, they make the most money, so I'm gonna apply for SaaS programming roles. And I applied for, I would say, maybe 120 roles, and wow. I did about 30 or 40 interviews, and everyone said no. And then finally, like, I got somebody who would give me an opportunity, which was a guy called Chris Goulden at Freeman's Grattan. And then I started to learn SaaS, and he kind of taught me, and some guys in the team, and I still wasn't anywhere near good enough. So I used to work a little bit later. I used to come in a little bit earlier, just to get the skills and build my skills up, so I felt as though I was competent. And the truth is, like, it took 6 or 7 years and failure after failure after failure, and then just all of a sudden it just clicks. And after all of the failure, willing to fail, you've got on your t-shirt. All of a sudden, I did SAS programming in SQL, but I did it for marketing, pricing, credit risk, customer behavior, capacity planning, forecasting, and I never ever felt like I knew anything. And then all of a sudden, probably about 3 years ago, just almost as when I was starting TMAC, I felt like actually I am really, really competent now. I'm aware of who I am, and especially I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm bad at as well, which is important.
And so that what's the bit in between? So if TMAC was 3 years ago, what's the bit in between?
Yeah, so so it was funny how I got into contact centers actually. It's quite interesting. So I was working in credit risk, and I knew that that's not where I wanted to necessarily be. I wanted to, at the time I was like, oh, I want to work in marketing. So then went to work in pricing. Did a bit of working for Tesco Bank. It was funny. I worked in credit risk when it was the financial crisis, and I worked in pricing when there was the personal injury crisis. And then I worked in digital transformation when it was going to be digitized. So maybe I'm like a bad penny.
Well, we're very similar. I was in mortgages in 2008. So
good time.
Yeah. Great. I just arrived in it as well. And they were like, why is everyone jumping out of windows? What's happening?
Well, look, and it was a real, I speak about that time around working in credit risk and stuff. It's so, people don't understand, and like, especially like younger people who work there, like, seeing your friends who work at like, the Halifax Bank or something, who they've invested into shares and stuff, and they see it just going down. It was a really, really strange time. But what was good was, I think I'm a good person in a crisis. So in a crisis, things have to change. There's a force, which is we have to change things, and I like change. I'm really, really rubbish when everything's like really, really like stable, because nobody wants to change anything. Then they just want to sort of plod on, and I just get really frustrated and throw my toys out my pram. So it was probably good that there's been all of this kind of change for me, because it enabled me opportunities. So I worked for banks and building societies, and then I was doing some market. I worked in marketing effectiveness. But then I felt to myself, I want to have a go contracting, like kind of consulting. And I took the first consulting job that I could, which was working in capacity planning for contact centers. And I just loved it. And I fell in love with it because it was the dynamic between, you've got pricing, you've got marketing, you've got planning, you've got people, humans.
Yeah.
And the ecosystem around contact centers, like, it just kind of buzzed me. I just loved it.
Yeah.
And that's when, and as well, like, I spent probably again 3 or 4 months understanding about planning. I'll just tell you this. So a guy, I was sat next to a guy called Paul Pritchard at Direct Line Group, and he taught me about handling time. So AHT. Demand and supply, and it was like how you all of these things got into your capacity plans or your resource planning. And he taught me, and I kept doing it, and I kept like reforecasting and doing insights and stuff. And at the end he was like, yeah, but none of it matters. I'm like, why? It's because we've got a budget, and the budget's the budget, so it doesn't matter if you need 600 guys. We've only got budget for 550, so tough luck. So I've done all of this. I'm like, improve the forecast. Like, I've got insights on the HT. Yeah, it doesn't matter. This is the budget, so deal with it. Like, right, okay. And then it was a little bit of a Mr. Miyagi moment.
I love it. I absolutely love it. We I know this is about you, but you just reminded me. I've got to tell you this one. So I was working in a contact center, and we won the contract. Do you remember? One of the big gaming firms had a data breach.
Yeah.
So what they offered their gamers was they just had to ring up, give their gamer ID, and they would get a ID protection service free for a year. Now we we were the contact center that's going to take those calls, provide that service. And I was in operations, and they said, right, I need you to work with this guy from planning, because we've got the deal. But they need to move quick. We're going to hire 100 people, go live next week. And this is a deadline. It's got to happen. It's all exciting. We were working like 12-hour days. But when it came to, and like you say, a contact center is a microcosm, right? Of everything is thrown in there in the arena. There's compliance, there's planning, there's pricing, ops, marketing, customer service, product. It's all there. And everyone was like, right, we needed to have a script. This needs to be in the script. This does. Because it's a security breach, some of the compliance sections were big. And they said, but we need it to be punchy because these are gamers. So it was me and this one other guy, and we just worked. And they said, right, we need to see the script, because this was like 2 days before. Here's a script. We went through it. And I think it was the first time we role played it, it was a minute, right? A minute long. But that was both of us being really compliant, yeah? And which customers are not, of course. And they went, yeah, right, little problem. This only works if the script is 16 seconds long. Yeah. On this model, you've cost this company like $3 million. But it just shows sometimes, though, how thinking isn't joined up, because we were like, there's no way you can do this in 16 seconds. And so, well, that's a deal, we've agreed. So, hello, Monkey 1982. Here's your product. Goodbye.
But is that not like? But that's where like I've started to be like way more humble around data and data science and analytics and stuff, because it can only shape a conversation. Unfortunately, like that shape and those probabilities that you'll come up with and stuff meets reality, which is, well, unfortunately, this is what's going to happen. And I do think that, going through that process on CAP planning, but also other experiences, it's just made me think like how much like data science, AI, all this type of stuff, it'll take you so far, but actually like it's real humans and real decisions and like harsh realities really that you have to face in the to balance it out.
I liked one of your adverts, actually. I know we're jumping around a bit, but it was around, and you could tell how you brought this realism in, because it was around when, consultants come in and have, I think it was a snail with loads and loads of things on its back, like loads and loads of ideas, and then deliver them slowly. That isn't realism. That isn't the realism of a contact center. So if that example that I just gave, if we'd have got the meaningful data at the start of our involvement, we would have been able to help shape it, do something better, rather than waste all that time. And I think the way you kind of talk, you have that realism in mind. Is that one of the key things that makes the Modular Analytics company different for you? Is that a big ethos of yours?
So yeah, I think so. I became a contractor quite early in my career, and I saw and the Modular Analytics company started off as a consultancy, and we're actually pivoting now. But the consultant aspect of it came from this. 80 to 90% of transformation projects fail, and they fail because they cost too much. And it's all top-down visionary stuff with no idea about how it actually gets implemented. So what you need is you need a surgeon, you need an operation, you need precise small cuts to make the operation work. But you have like this big visionary thing without any idea how to deploy it. The second thing as well on that is again, psychology. So if you employ a consultancy, like, and I'm going to be, should I be careful? Nah, I'm not going to be careful. Right. The goal of a consultancy is to make money just like everybody else. So if they could do something in 3 months or 24 months, what would they choose? They choose 24 months.
Yeah.
They tried to load it with a load of project managers and senior people, and they charge people like me and you out at like £1,500 a day to just come in and just fill space.
Yeah.
and the costs just really, really, really escalate. And then like what then happens is, because the costs escalate and the time frames just expand, what happens is that we have a concept in TMAG, and it's called oh shit. And oh shit is every single project like goes wrong at some point. And the trick and what happens with most projects is the oh shit moment comes when you've spent 500 to 750 grand and it's taken you 6 to 9 months to actually get into it, because you've just like, you know, you've looked at your navel, done some navel gazing, you've filled up some time, you've had some meetings, and all of a sudden like this goes by and you're like, now it's failed. Now
Yeah.
that's when you get into it. Now, if you do that once you've already spent 500 to 750 grand, like one thing happens, it then becomes an emperor's new clothes.
Yeah.
So, because it's had really, really senior sponsorship, so it's like this cannot fail. So even if it's a terrible idea, like that was never going to work from the beginning, this project now will not fail, and either becomes a zombie project where we go, right, well, if we drag it out long enough, people will forget about it, or we assign a load of, it becomes like a vacuum where every single other good thing that was going on in your business has to be attributed to this project. So it's like, where can we find benefits? Like,
have we got a link to this over here? Yeah.
10 years links. Yeah, that's part of Project X now. That's part of Project X. I'm lobbing it in, and it becomes like an absolute nightmare. Whereas, just to get used to the benefits case. Whereas, so what we wanted to do was we wanted to just be faster, better, and more affordable, and to take some of the risk ourselves. So we started off as an outcome-based consultancy. All of our projects were delivered in not an agile manner, but we delivered them fast, so within 4 weeks. Because they were delivered in 4 weeks, we kept the cost down, and we got to the oh shit moment a lot quicker. And then because we were faster and more affordable, what the net effect of that is, even if we only delivered 50% of the benefits of the bigger boys, or 60%, 70%, we often say that we work on Pareto principle. We deliver
love that
for 20% of the cost. But even if we deliver that, we're delivering a much, much, much bigger ROI. And not types of things that we were doing, and we were doing them in next best action, so upsell and cross sell. We've done that in speech analytics, we've done it in coaching, so contact center coaching kind of solutions as well. But it's all about just being quicker, being more affordable, and then not trying to like over engineer or become a bit of a leech on the business. Try and build trust and lifetime value with our clients over time.
And that what prompted you to set the company up? Did that happen organically? Were you scared of doing it? What, can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, I was insanely scared. Like,
really?
I'm not a good people manager. You can speak to some guys who've worked with me historically, and because I've been so, say, maniacally focused on me and like just improving bits, I've not always been in fact, not always been, I've definitely not been the best like manager and stuff like that. I've always tried to, when people are in the shit, and when things aren't right, I think I've always been like empathetic, and I put my hand around them and stuff like that. But coaching and performance management, like it's never really been my focus. And so I'd had some little businesses and stuff historically as well that hadn't gone well, and I'd kind of gone like, no, it's me. Like, it's something that I can control. I'll just be a consultant. And then what happened was, one of my friends kind of said to me one day, who I'd done some work with, he goes, Jimmy, like, how come you can deliver like analytics projects like far quicker than anybody else? Like, I give you some work to do, and for everybody else it says that it's 3 months, and you do it in 2 weeks. And I kind of said to them, well, I think everything's been done before, and everything's modular, and I just kind of do a little bit of an IKEA job where nothing, every individual piece is not unique to you, but how I rearrange them is unique to you. So it's very, very quick, and I'm a rubbish programmer. I'm not the best like mathematician or statistician, and maybe I'm not the best people manager, but I think I'm a relatively strong like solution provider, and I can build an idea in my head very quickly about what somebody wants and where to hit the engine to get it running. And so all it was about was like codifying that and giving a bit of a structure to it, which is what I worked on. So this friend, he said to me, he said, you should write a book. So I started writing a book, and I was absolutely terrible because I just don't care enough. Which was called the Modular Analytics Cookbook. And at the same time, the co-founder of TMAC, Sean Northam, he'd just gone contracting, and he just started bugging me about us doing something together and doing and starting a company and doing this outcome-based stuff. And he'd be the face and I'd be the brains, even though like I think I'm the face and the brains. That type of thing. And we and he just kept, he's like a dog with a bone, and he just kept, and I was like, I'm rubbish at writing, I'm more practical. Sean's like super energetic about this. We should start a business, and that's how the Modular Analytics company was born.
But then but you'd had experience of setting up a business before, or were you just like similar sort of thing? Did you just research it? What did you?
So because I then worked for about 5 years in contact centers, I had a very, very clear idea about what some of the challenges were. And I think we had kind of, in terms of modules, we had about 5 modules. They had all subsets and components that went into it. But I think when we started, we had, so upsell, cross-sell within contact centers. I just didn't think anybody did it particularly well. I think it was always people and personality and target driven rather than customer driven. So I think that was one. One was around voice of the customer. So I thought that the voice of the customer world was dominated by either a few big speech providers, and I didn't think that their products were particularly great. And then people who couldn't afford speech were doing surveys, but the surveys aren't great either. So you're not getting a full picture. So I wanted to do like something better when it came to voice of the customer. Then we had one around people analytics. So I thought that there should be a systemic way of coaching people. I saw a lot of behaviors where team managers had spent an inordinate amount of time like collecting data to put together a one-to-one, and it's like that's not the value. Like their value should be getting the information and then relaying it, and then not speaking about the right things. So too much concentration on handling time, too much concentration on a crappy NPS metric that had just been kind of made up and got signed off at board level, but was never going to be
bollocks.
Yeah, it's bollocks, mate. and then not identifying like attrition. So if you guys at attrition risk, like you should identify that and have a safe conversation with them. So things like that. So better frameworks for that. And then a couple of others, like one around like improving your forecasting and your cap planning, and understanding the dynamics around it. And then one around like, kind of risk and compliance and things. And then over time, we've gone on a journey. We delivered proof of concepts and did things around each one of those. But over time, we've just started to productize what we're doing, and now the capacity planning and the more of the kind of risk stuff we're doing less of, and we've now started to build three products for next best action, speech analytics and voice of the customer, and performance coaching.
On that coaching piece, it's always been a real area I like to focus on. The company I work for now, and things like that, but a genuine interest in coaching, because I think you ask a lot of team managers. We as an industry ask a lot and don't necessarily prepare them. And your point is really valid around, I could see people when I first became a contact center manager and I had team leaders, I'd see team leaders wandering off with like a massive set of paper. I was, are you guys off to court? What are you? Are you lawyers? What is that? I said, it's all my prep for my formal coaching session. And it was just such a waste of time, where you're in this environment where time off the phone is golden, that it's kind of like, oh, we've got time off the phone, let's make the most out of it. And then you just bore someone to death with the long-winded coaching session that doesn't actually make them better. Because I used to think it'd be good to get your view on coaching. For me, coaching's a challenge when both the person that's being coached and the coach can't necessarily, they're not being given the skills to jump over the mental hurdles that exist. So the reason someone doesn't do a particular thing, and sales is always easy to make these examples, right? If someone does an objection handle, it's because they don't want to. You can tell them how to say it, doesn't mean it. They just, when they get to that point of a conversation with a customer, something stops them. They don't want to be that person. That's a mental hurdle. And then you talk to someone about, okay, well, you do the coaching session, right? And now I listen to your next call, and they objection handle, and you go, well done, brilliant. And then you go off, and then they don't change because you haven't got to the why. You haven't really developed them as a person. Do you know what I mean? I'm rambling a bit, but it's
no. So I completely agree. And like, there's a few different principles. There's a few different principles there. So like, number one, like, it's better decisions faster. So how can we put better decisions in front of everybody's eyes? And I went on a bit of a journey. I started off doing stats, and then once I've done stats, I was like, right, how do I surface this to people? Surface information. And we used to surface information in visualizations. So I did a lot of Power BI, Tableau, things like that. Then I realized nobody understands them. Even a bar chart. So nothing comes off the back of it. So if you go, like, your performance went from here and it's going up here and then it's going down there, most people just blank out and just go, not interested. So it's about, you've got to do like plain English. You've got to kind of go, like, your performance on sales conversion was lower quartile. Your conversion was 10%, and the next quartile up was 15%. Like, you're 5% off this, and you need to concentrate on nailing this part of your script. So being very prescriptive about it. So it's the prescriptive nature of the actions that you need to do, and therefore you then go, well, how are these prescriptive actions being surfaced? Are they being surfaced through a human being? Well, if you've got a team leader doing it, how confident are you that your team leader is actually nailing it? So far better for those prescriptive messages to come through an agent desktop or a specific coaching tool, where you can then go, well, number one, have you as an agent logged into that platform to actually look at your coaching actions? And number two, like, how long have you spent on that page where it's giving you that action? It's a bit like social media engagement. By turning your conversations into digital products, you can then track engagement just as you would do on Twitter or Facebook and things like that. What you then find is that your agent, first of all, it's about driving engagement with your agent base. Like, drive engagement into the tool. We've got a tool that makes you better, and it's very, very clear. And you could do this in Excel. You can do this you can do it with, I've done it by creating sentences and conditional formatting and things in Excel, even. Very, very simple stuff, where this goes down, where this goes up and stuff. But giving you this very, very simple tool. First things first, I just need you to log in. I need you to show up.
Same thing, isn't it?
So just show up. Then when you show up, you can then see your actions. Now I see your actions, like, how long are you spending on that screen on your actions? And then it's this systemic approach where over time, it's not just once every week or once every month where you're having a coaching conversation. Every day you could be looking at your performance and getting better. And there's an overarching thing here, which I'm super, super passionate about. So like we're seeing digitisation and people being moved to chatbots and stuff like that, and it's wrong. It's wrong for customers. Like it's eroding customer lifetime value because you get really bad experiences by pushing people online. But it's because we see the contact center as a cost that needs to be avoided, and we don't see the benefits of a human talking to a human. Whereas actually, if we can make our humans better, like contact centers who make their humans better will see huge improvements with their customer lifetime value, with customer churn, with employee satisfaction. And it might mean that the employees are a bit more under the pump because they can't stay in wrap. They've got to get out. They've got to hit their compliance scripts and the framing scripts and the sales scripts and the objection handle scripts, because rather than a person monitor it on a QA, it's always being monitored through the use of speech analytics. It might be a little bit more of an intense environment for humans, but I think for businesses, it's far more valuable, far more valuable. Like humans, empathetic humans delivering next best action and decisions and improvements and improving themselves will get him far better than AI at the moment. And it's better for those employees because we're not just going to automate the shit out of stuff, which ultimately, like automation, it commoditizes your product. If all of your services is automated, then why would I be at Bank A versus Bank B versus Bank C? Well, I might as well just move around to who gives me the best price. And I think it's bad for everybody. So I'm passionate about it.
I'm signing up for this revolution. I want to be with you. I want to be with you on the front lines. I absolutely love that because we have made you mentioned this phrase before, emperor's new clothes, right? Within the industry, we kid ourselves all the time that all of these CX experts, all of this, it's a load of nonsense, because when we become to be customers, we have to wade through the crystal mazes that we've set up for our customers out there. So, if you've got something to do. So at the start of lockdown, we moved house. And I booked days off because I knew I'd have a battle on my hands. Right, I've got to set up the internet. I've got to get the utilities. I'm going to go through. I'm going to beat the chatbot. Yeah, beat the chatbot. First of all, try and find a number. You can't find a number. And I remember thinking, why hasn't anyone, and I know there are some companies out there that have done it, some brands that are doing some really interesting things, where they've just gone, because I think the evolvement of our terminology will go, it's gone call center, contact center. I'm hoping it goes customer center. So we're the customer center network, where take a call center, fill it full of people and pay them decently, train them well, and then just open them up to customers, make it easy for customers to contact them without making a customer climb a mountain, get to the top and go, right, now you can speak to our guru. Just let them in.
But do you not think as well, like, so what we've done is we've made contact centers worse, and then by making them worse, we've gone, so we'll do a chatbot or we'll do live chat because that's a better experience. Well, no, that's just because you made the contact center worse. Like,
yeah,
don't make these worse and then go, this is a better experience. Like, you should have made this better, made it the best thing possible.
Exactly.
Like, a really interesting thing as well, a really interesting dynamic that I just don't think anybody twigs about voice in particular. I'm going to be careful because I might set up a load of like instruments and stuff here, but how many people have Alexa and use Siri and use Google Home and stuff now? Voice is what's easy. Saying, can you tell me this? Can you tell me that? It's a far better experience actually for people. Like, for certain things, it's not. Like, in fact, I'm just going to go on a bit of a diatribe here. Like, voice-led ID&D is the bane of my existence. So you tried to take out a part of the conversation where I'm on a bus and I'm having to shout out my personal details and stuff like that. Well, let me change it. Like, come on, guys. Anyway, but voice is really popular now. Like
My mum's maiden name.
yeah, is that right? Yes, that's right. Just like, come on, guys. Yeah, everyone's staring at you. So, but voice is huge. Voice is easier than typing, and we've got loads of voice activated devices like that we're surrounded by now. Like voice, when it's done correctly, and like when it's of value, is far better. And look, we're trying to like move demand to chatbots and to live chat or to async. Like I personally think asynchronous messaging is the best form. Like there should be messaging and voice, that's it, none in the middle, because I only contact somewhere not because I can't self-serve. If it's urgent, like I need it now, so I need to get on the phone. I've got a small time period. I need to do it now. For everything else, like I've got all of the time in the world, and I can just send a WhatsApp or a Facebook message and stuff like that. So I think that the voice, you can see like the Amazons and the Googles and the Apples and stuff. They understand that voice is going to be huge. But in contact centers, we're still saying that we want people to type stuff up, and even worse, like still people are using emails.
I know it defies belief, doesn't it? Yeah. But I think it's interesting because I can't remember what I was looking for, but I was doing some research and I found an article, and it was about the prediction that voice in contact centers would go, and it's coming really soon because of technology. And as I was reading through it, I thought, I wonder what the date of this is. Went to the end of this, because it's quite an academic article, went to the end of it, and it was like 2004. And since, from then, it's been, the end of voice has been predicted over and over and over again. But it's and people link it to like different generations. This generation won't like voice. This generation won't like voice. But yet voice is still 60, 70% of all customer contact. It's got to be for a reason.
It's actually funny. Like, and look, I don't think I'm too old. I'm only just turned 39, and like I'm like hyper digital. Like I'm on all the social media platforms that I use and stuff like that. But I still believe in voice because it's easier. If I could just ring somebody when I've got an urgent, slightly complicated request, nuanced request, and get that done, then I do it. I don't try and like do web chat or anything like that because it's a little bit complicated. And yeah, I think with the rise of Alexa, Siri, Google Home, and voice activation, more people are more used to just shouting out like a simple request and getting an answer for it. And I think the next generation of that will be linking that into the contact centers and asking what your balance is, or asking what your last 5 payments were, and then asking to be put through to an advisor. And I think people should be more cognizant of that. See people who are trying to do very, very like deep cuts to the contact center through the use of automation and things, but not really understanding the dynamics about why in travel, like people will call. Well, it's because they're stuck somewhere, or there's been delayed, where it's timed up, or even things like in insurance, where why would people want to call? Well, if they change something that impacts their price, then they want to call to negotiate with you to try and do a deal. And it's these types of dynamics that I think we often oversimplify the contact center, and it's at our peril.
Well, you mentioned something quite early on in this conversation around discounting the human element and emotions at your peril, right? Because in the last 2 examples you gave, the one thing that a voice can give people, talking to a human can give people, is trust. So I challenge people, if you book a holiday and you do your component parts, so you might go, here's my travel, here's the flight, here's the accommodation, Airbnb, blah, blah, blah. At some point, you will want to speak to someone to get that trust because of all the things that have happened, because of not just COVID, but volcanoes or whatever. And then in the other example that you gave, from an insurance point of view, people do want to speak to a human. That the element of customer trust is still, I think, sometimes missing in anything other than voice.
There's also a thing as well, like, let's talk about the real bleeding edge of AI, where there is some AI now, not generally, because like general use AI that everybody uses right now, that everybody's using for chatbots and all this type of stuff, is like rubbish. It's only good for simple tasks. And if a human, when in a contact center, is struggling because they're using like 7 different screens and they're having to contact 7 different places, they're having to speak to the team manager, how's a chatbot gonna fix those types?
Yeah.
But if we talk about the real bleeding edge, like where you could have a conversation with an AI, that's, people don't want that. It's called the uncanny valley, and people who know that they're talking to a robot, but the robot's being too human-like, it's a real turn off for them.
Yeah.
An actual study, you can go and have a look at it. And so right now, I think, and I don't even think it's the right thing to do. Yeah, just it's not even morals or anything like that. Like if you're just talking like pure like money value, like set your agents up for success. Like give them the right decisions, put the right decisions in the face, and make sure that you data them and they're coached correctly and stuff. But that's a hugely like better experience than trying to do all of this clever stuff, some of which like my company did.
What you mentioned something about kind of a slight change in direction for TMAC. Where are you going? What's the vision?
So look, we started off as a consultancy, and we started prototyping and building products. And then I think the middle of last year, we just decided that we wanted to become more a software as a service company. I think that wouldn't surprise people. I think that's where there's like a huge amount of growth and there's a huge amount of interest, especially in contact centers and B2B. But we felt that we had like, we felt that we'd earned our spurs for the stuff that we'd done, but also we felt like we could take the concept about driving value and turn it into software as a service, where at the minute so many people aren't getting the value from the tools that they have at their disposal. So we made that decision. We did a round of funding which closed probably about kind of December, January time. And we started to build our products, and now we've got all of our products coming off the assembly line. I think the most interesting one there as well is like we spoke about next best action, like cross-sell and upsell and coaching. But I think the most interesting one there was like speech analytics. So I've always had like an axe to grind about speech analytics. Like for every good speech analytics story, you've got like 78 like ones where it's failed and it's been rubbish. And I think absolutely shit is one of the quotes that pops up. And so what me and the guys did, which sounds stupid and like crazy, and some of the investors that we've been speaking to is like, how did you do that? But we built our own speech transcription algorithm, and we trained it over the last kind of 2 years, and we've now started to productize it. And people go, well, why have you done that? Well, it's because like, I won't name all of the names, but you've got like the big providers charge an absolute fortune, but then even the likes of Amazon and Google, they're charging $1.40 per transcribed hour, which is a lot. It's a lot of money for some people. Yeah, and by building our own algorithm, we've done it for 80% cheaper. Wow. So that's where, because we own it as well, it wasn't to do with money or intellectual property or anything like that. It was because we now own it, we can do shit for free. We can do free proof of concepts. We can test stuff. We can test some ideas. Whereas the hurdle rate for testing stuff, we're gonna have to pay someone 20 grand to see if we can build a customer trust model or a vulnerability model. Whereas now we own it ourselves, we can do some more stuff. So I think it was a bit accidental how we got into it, but it's meant that we've got a product set now that it kind of still hits those consultancy ethos things that we always wanted, which is faster, better, and more affordable. But it's more SaaS product led rather than consultancy led.
And how you kind of portray yourselves out there in the world with the visual imagery and the messaging. I mean, I love it, but was there much debate around that in terms of how do we show up externally as a company? What is who are we? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm a little bit of a dictator when it comes to some stuff like this, and I think the branding, like, we could talk about like the core values and stuff, like, us being like, proudly different. We talk about ourselves as being proudly different, and like, guys, as we're going through branding, going proudly different, that's a bit strange. Like, why would you say that? But it's because it's unique, and because it sounds strange on your tongue doesn't mean that we shouldn't say it, because that's how we are. We try and be different in our branding, the way we go about things, how we talk to people. We do try and be proudly different. When it comes to visual imagery and stuff, we wanted it to be kind of simple and about simple building blocks, and you can see that from the branding and stuff. But when I first showed people the logo, like, most people hated it. But most people don't have a clue about this type of stuff as well. And I think the phrase is a horse by committee is a camel.
Yeah.
Like, if too many people's opinions, it just starts to cloud it. And what you generally end up with, if you take too many people's opinions, if you get an all text logo with grey and a bit of blue, boom, and then you can kind of Google that and see all of them, and they all look like vaguely the same. So I think we wanted to be kind of bold and have those bold primary colours. We wanted it to be about the building blocks. And then the kind of the proudly different element came in. And then I think, looping back around to the start, I think what we always try and be is authentic. And I think the challenge that we always have internally, and it's a good challenge to have, is like, when are we being authentic, and then where do we become unprofessional? And how do we like balance that line all of the time between the way in which we present ourselves, the way in which we talk about ourselves, and the way in which, like, our clients and the public perceive us. And I think that'll always be a case when you're trying to push boundaries and push the envelope a little bit and do something different and engaging. I think you're going to come up against those challenges. But I think authenticity is a big word, and it's something that we're always like, yeah, how do we balance off that authenticity against, like, making sure that we come across as dependable and professional?
I love it. I bet the more people that said they disliked it made you strengthen your like of it.
I'm a very difficult man. So when I dig my heels in, but look, it's all to do with this backward reasoning. Like, now the branding and the logo and everything about it works, and people love it. But like, people would not have made those decisions right at the beginning, because it was too risque. It was too. I think someone said it was too childish. But the whole point was, it was supposed to be childish. It was supposed to be simpler.
Yeah.
But it's easy once you're here to go, it's worked. But right back in the day, yeah, it was a challenge.
We're coming to the end. I'm conscious you're a very busy man. Hopefully you want to come back, because we've got other things that we could talk about. I love talking to you. Just want to end with, what advice would you give to the version of you, maybe just prior to that decision to code? Is there anything that you would, or maybe what advice would you give to people that are listening to this that are early to mid 20s, could be in a contact center, could be feeling don't really know where they're going? What advice would you give?
I think first of all, I would say, set yourself targets, set yourself goals, give yourself a big vision that you want to go for, and make the big vision almost a bit big and not scary, but ambitious. Be ambitious about it, because you don't generally tend to try and hit in unambitious goals. So give yourself something that's worth going for, and then give yourself all of the little tasks that you need to do to get to that. think that's what I'd say first of all. And you can give yourself, you know, I gave myself kind of a 5-year goal to become competent in coding, and to, you know, I think when I was 25, wanted to earn 30 grand by the time I was 30 and become a programmer, that kind of thing. And then I just broke down all of the tasks. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, like, be very, 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 very patient. Like, I can't stress enough how those that have patience ultimately, like, succeed. When you just rip stuff up all of the time and throw it away, and then rip it up and throw it away, like, you don't make progress. You've got to believe in, like, incrementalism and show up every single day. I think that's the I think that's important. And then I think the final thing is like, network. So although I don't think I'm always the best kind of people person or people manager and stuff, I think understand that the way really you get to where you want to be, like, some of it's luck, some of it's patience, some of it's hard work, but quite a bit of it is always nepotism. and it's knowing the right person who can help you along that way. And one thing that I always did was I always spoke to, you know, always put myself forward to speak to managers and senior managers and things. I always spoke to recruiters. So many people do not speak to recruiters, but recruiters were like my lifeblood, and so many of them have, like, put food on my table. Okay, they put food on their own, but I don't know about
that's the way it works, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And, like, speak to recruiters and give them time, and, like, build rapport with these guys, because these are the guys who get the jobs, like, first, and build a network of people, like, that both you trust and they trust you, and do good work for each other, and become, like, a dependable cog in that network. I think that's kind of the final thing that I would say.
I love that. I found this really motivational, Jimmy. Thanks so much for doing it. You, even just listening to the number of rejections you had today. My 14-year-old daughter contacted me. She went for a summer job, had the interview, had done loads of prep, was really jazzed about it. She was really proud of going for it, and she got the rejection letter while she was at school today, the email or message from, they're doing it through Facebook. And I want her to listen to some of this, because that kind of, you know what, you win or you learn. You know, there's no, you know, it feels like a loss, but you'll be better prepared the next time. You just keep going, that kind of keep going, because it's not presenteeism, is it? It's about every day just engaging in something and just keep going, and you will get what you want if you keep going and you have those targets. I love it. It's been great, this has.
Awesome. Yeah, enjoy the grind.
Thanks very much, Jimmy.
Awesome. Cheers.
Thank you.